My name is Rebecca Williams. I'm 54 years old, and for the past 28 years, I've worked in financial crimes enforcement for the United States government. Most people don't know what that means. They picture FBI agents kicking down doors, or detectives chasing criminals through back alleys. But my work happened in silence. Behind computer screens, through encrypted channels, tracking money that moved like ghosts through offshore accounts and shell companies. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I specialized in something called economic espionage. When foreign governments tried to manipulate our currency, when terrorist organizations laundered money through American banks, when corrupt officials moved billions through networks so complex they seemed impossible to trace, that's when they called me. My clearance level was so high that even my business cards were classified. My office had no nameplate. My victories never made headlines because success in my field meant preventing disasters that the public would never know almost happened. Last Tuesday, I sat in my rental car outside Riverside Memorial Gardens, watching my own family gather for my grandfather's will reading. The law office was a red brick building with white columns, the kind of place that screamed old money and tradition. Through the tall windows, I could see my relatives filing into the conference room. My father, dressed in his best Navy suit, shaking hands with the attorney. My brother Marcus, straightening his tie like he was preparing for a job interview. My sister Claire, clutching her purse and checking her phone. My cousins, aunts, uncles, 3 generations of the Williams family, all present and accounted for, all except me. I wasn't invited. When Grandpa Theodore passed away 6 weeks ago, I learned about it through a newspaper obituary. No phone call, no text message, no black-bordered envelope in my mailbox. Just his name in the Springfield Herald, surrounded by the names of survivors who were all related to me but no longer claimed me as family. The funeral had been held while I was traveling for work, though I suspect the timing wasn't coincidental. By the time I flew back to Ohio, the grave was already covered with fresh earth and dying flowers. The will reading was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. I found out about it the same way I'd found out about the funeral, by accident. A former colleague mentioned seeing my father at the downtown Marriott, talking about settling estate matters. It took 3 phone calls to discover the location and time. When I called the law office directly, the receptionist was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, Miss Williams, but I don't see your name on the approved attendee list. You'll need to speak with the family about being added." So I called my father. The conversation lasted exactly 43 seconds. "Dad, it's Rebecca. I heard about the will reading today. I'd like to attend." "That's not possible. I'm his granddaughter. I have a right to be there." "You forfeited your rights when you chose your career over your family." "What does that even mean?" "You know exactly what it means. Don't call here again." The line went dead. I could have fought it, could have hired my own attorney, filed motions, demanded my legal right to be present. But after 12 years of silence, after 12 years of being treated like I was dead, I wasn't sure I had the energy to resurrect myself just for money I didn't need and property I didn't want. Instead, I drove to Springfield anyway, not to crash the reading or make a scene, but to see them one more time, to remember what I used to belong to before everything changed. Before Detroit, before the investigation that saved the American banking system and destroyed my relationship with everyone who shared my blood. From my car, I watched them through those windows like I was conducting surveillance on strangers. My father looked older, grayer around the temples. My brother had gained weight, his face fuller than I remembered. Claire wore the same style of dress she'd favored since high school, conservative, expensive, safe. They laughed at something the attorney said. Someone passed around tissues. Someone else opened a briefcase. They looked like a family. Complete, functional, united in their grief and their expectations. I looked like what I was, an outsider studying them through glass, taking mental notes on people who once knew my middle name and my favorite ice cream flavor, but now couldn't pick me out of a lineup. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Rebecca Williams. This is Janet Holloway, from Holloway and Associates. We're handling your grandfather's estate. Could you please come inside? There's been a development." I stared at the message for a full minute. A development. That could mean anything. Maybe Grandpa had left me something after all, despite the family's wishes. Maybe there was some legal requirement for me to be present. Maybe someone had finally grown a conscience and realized that excluding his granddaughter from his final goodbye was wrong. I almost ignored it, almost drove away. After 12 years of silence, after 12 years of being erased from family photos and holiday cards, after 12 years of having my name spoken like a curse word, if it was spoken at all, I had built a life that didn't require their approval or their inheritance. But something made me stay. Not hope, exactly. More like curiosity, the same instinct that had made me good at my job, the need to see how the story ended, even when you already knew it would hurt. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. The October air was crisp, cutting through my wool coat, like a reminder that winter was coming whether I was ready or not. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked toward the building, each step feeling like I was approaching a crime scene where I was both the investigator and the victim. The receptionist looked surprised when I entered. "Miss Williams, we weren't expecting you." I received a text from Janet Holloway asking me to come inside. She frowned, checked her computer, then picked up the phone. After a brief, whispered conversation, she nodded toward the conference room, third door on the right. "They're waiting for you." Waiting for me. Those words felt foreign after so many years of not being waited for, not being included, not being remembered. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps muffled by thick carpet, past portraits of dead lawyers and framed diplomas that probably cost more than most people's cars. The conference room door was heavy oak with frosted glass. Through it I could see shadows and movement, but no details. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. On the other side of that door was everyone I had once loved and who had once loved me back. Everyone who now treated me like I was a stranger, or worse, like I was a traitor. I thought about Detroit again, about the choice I made in that hotel room 8 years ago when my family needed me to choose them and I chose something else. About the consequences that followed, swift and permanent as a door slamming shut. But I also thought about the thousands of families who still had their savings because of what I did. The retirees who kept their pensions, the small business owners who didn't lose everything, the college students whose loan programs didn't collapse. The American families who never knew how close they came to losing everything, because I made sure they didn't have to find out. I knocked twice, firm and confident. The sound that followed was immediate silence, like the entire room had stopped breathing. "Come in," a woman's voice called. I turned the handle and stepped inside. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My father's face hardened into the expression I remembered from childhood when I'd broken something valuable. My brother looked like he'd seen a ghost. Claire actually gasped, then covered her mouth with her hand. At the head of the long mahogany table sat a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. She smiled at me warmly, which was more warmth than I'd received from my actual family in over a decade. "Rebecca Williams," she said, standing and extending her hand. "I'm Janet Holloway. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." The only empty chair was at the far end of the table, as far from my father as possible. I walked toward it, feeling every step like I was walking through hostile territory. No one spoke. No one smiled. No one welcomed me home. I sat down, placed my hands flat on the table, and waited. Whatever was about to happen, whatever development had required my presence, I was ready for it. After 12 years of exile, after 12 years of silence, I had learned to expect nothing and prepare for everything. What I wasn't prepared for was the way my grandfather's voice would reach out from beyond the grave to change everything. I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the price of doing what's right. Janet Holloway cleared her throat and opened a leather portfolio. The rustle of papers was the only sound in the room as she arranged documents with practiced precision. My family sat frozen in their chairs, stealing glances at me like I was a bomb that might detonate at any moment. "Before we begin with the formal reading," Janet said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had presided over countless family dramas, "I need to address something unusual about Mr. Theodore Williams' final wishes." My father shifted in his seat. "What kind of unusual?" Theodore left specific instructions regarding the attendance at this reading. He was very clear about who needed to be present. Janet's eyes found mine across the table. He insisted that Rebecca Williams be notified and included, regardless of any family objections. The silence that followed was deafening. My brother Marcus finally broke it, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. He didn't know. Grandpa didn't understand what she did to this family. What did I do? The words came out sharper than I intended, cutting through the polite atmosphere like a blade. What exactly did I do, Marcus? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. You know damn well what you did. Claire's voice was ice cold, each word deliberate. You chose them over us. When we needed you most, when Dad's business was falling apart, when everything was crashing down around us, you sided with the government instead of your own blood. I felt the familiar knot form in my stomach. The same knot I'd carried for 8 years, the weight of a choice that had cost me everything I thought mattered. That's not what happened, isn't it? My father finally spoke, his voice carrying decades of disappointment. You had information, inside knowledge. You could have warned us what was coming. One phone call, Rebecca. That's all it would have taken. One call to tell your family that our lives were about to be destroyed. I couldn't, or wouldn't. Marcus leaned forward, his face flushed. Do you have any idea what happened after Detroit? Do you know what your silence cost us? I knew exactly what it had cost them. I'd watched from a distance as Williams Construction, the company my great-grandfather built and my father had run for 37 years, collapsed under federal investigation. I'd seen the news reports about the indictments, the seized assets, the bankruptcy proceedings. I'd read every article, saved every clipping, tortured myself with every detail of my family's destruction. What they didn't know, what they could never know, was that I had tried to warn them. Not directly, because that would have been treason, but in small ways. Subtle hints, careful suggestions that maybe they should review their business partnerships, diversify their investments, be more cautious about their financial dealings. They had dismissed every attempt as paranoia, as my government job made me suspicious of everything. Your father lost everything, my Aunt Patricia said from across the table. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of years of resentment. The house, the business, his reputation. He had to declare bankruptcy at 62 years old. Do you understand what that does to a man? I understood better than they knew. I had spent 8 years understanding it, living with it, carrying the guilt of watching my family suffer while I stayed silent about the investigation that brought them down. But explaining that meant revealing classified information that could still land me in federal prison. It meant admitting that their business partners had been funneling money to offshore accounts controlled by foreign intelligence services. It meant destroying whatever small hope they had of rebuilding their lives with some dignity intact. The Hendersons won't even look at us anymore, Claire continued, her voice breaking slightly. 20 years of friendship, gone. The kids at school whispered about Dad being a criminal. Emily had to transfer schools because of the harassment. Emily, my niece. The last time I'd seen her, she was 7 years old, gap-toothed and giggling, begging me to push her higher on the swing set. Now she was 15, and I was a stranger who had destroyed her grandfather's life. I did what I had to do, I said quietly. It was the only defense I could offer, the only truth I was allowed to speak. What did you have to do? My father's voice rose for the first time, decades of suppressed anger finally breaking free. You had to choose between your job and your family, and you chose your job. You had to decide between protecting strangers and protecting the people who raised you, and you chose strangers. It wasn't that simple. It was exactly that simple. Marcus slammed his palm against the table, making the water glasses jump. The FBI came to our house at 6 in the morning. 6 in the morning, Rebecca. They had search warrants, handcuffs, and cameras. The neighbors stood in their yards and watched federal agents drag boxes out of our childhood home. And where were you? Where was our sister, our daughter, when we needed her most? I had been in a secure facility in Virginia, watching the raids happen in real time through satellite feeds, knowing that every box they carried contained evidence I had helped them find. Evidence that would eventually clear my father of any criminal wrongdoing but destroy his business in the process. Evidence that would save the American financial system but sacrifice my family's future. I was doing my job, I whispered. Your job. Claire laughed, but there was no humor in it. Your precious job. Do you know what happened to Mom during all of this? Do you care? The mention of my mother hit me like a physical blow. She had died 3 years ago, and I'd learned about it from her obituary. Cancer. She'd been sick for months, and no one had told me. I drove to the cemetery afterward, stood at her grave, and apologized to a headstone that couldn't hear me. Mom defended you right up until the end. Claire continued, tears streaming down her face now. Even when Dad lost everything, even when we had to sell the house and move into that apartment above the dry cleaner, she kept saying, you must have had your reasons. She kept saying her daughter wouldn't abandon her family without a good cause. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from crying. My mother, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with algebra homework and told me I could be anything I wanted to be, had died believing I might still come home. She had died waiting for an explanation I could never give. She asked for you at the end, my father said, his voice barely audible. In the hospital, she was delirious from the medication, but she kept asking when Rebecca was coming. She kept saying she needed to talk to Rebecca, that there were things she needed to explain. Dad, don't. Marcus reached over and touched his arm. No, she needs to hear this. She needs to know what her choices cost. He looked directly at me for the first time since I'd entered the room. Your mother died thinking she had failed you somehow. She spent her last weeks wondering what she could have done differently to keep her daughter from abandoning her family. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had burned for years. I wanted to tell them that I had tried to come home, that I had driven to the hospital twice, parked in the visitor lot, and sat in my car for hours, paralyzed by the certainty that my presence would only make things worse, that I had written dozens of letters I never sent, made hundreds of phone calls I never completed, and lived with the weight of their suffering every single day. But I said nothing, because the truth would have sounded like excuses, and excuses wouldn't bring my mother back or undo the damage I had caused. Janet Holloway had been watching this exchange with the professional detachment of someone who had seen families destroy themselves over money and pride countless times before. Finally, she cleared her throat. I understand this is difficult, she said carefully. But Theodore was very specific about his wishes. He wanted Rebecca here for a reason, and I think once you hear what he had to say, you'll understand why. What could he possibly have to say that would change anything? My father asked. Janet opened the will and began to read, her voice steady and clear. To my family, if you are hearing these words, it means I am gone, and Rebecca is sitting at this table despite your objections. I know you believe she betrayed us. I know you think she chose her career over her blood. But before you judge her too harshly, there are things you don't know, things I've kept secret for too long. I felt the blood drain from my face. Whatever my grandfather was about to reveal, I had a terrible feeling it was going to change everything. Janet continued reading from the will, my grandfather's voice echoing through her words like a ghost speaking from beyond the grave. Rebecca, if you're hearing this, it means you've carried the burden of Detroit alone for far too long. It means you've let this family hate you for something you had no choice in doing. And it means I failed to tell them the truth while I was alive to face the consequences. My hands were trembling. I pressed them flat against the table, trying to steady myself. How could my grandfather know about Detroit? The operation was classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people in the entire government knew the full scope of what had happened. The truth is, Rebecca didn't betray this family. She saved it. And she saved a lot more than that. My father's face had gone pale. What is he talking about? Janet looked at me, her expression sympathetic. Should I continue? I nodded, though every instinct screamed at me to stop this before it went too far. Before secrets that were meant to stay buried came clawing their way to the surface. In December 2016, Rebecca came to me, Janet read. She couldn't tell me everything. I understand why now, but she warned me that Williams' construction was in danger. She said there were problems with our international contracts, problems with our banking relationships. She begged me to convince your father to distance the company from certain business partners. Marcus leaned forward. What business partners? I closed my eyes, remembering that cold December night when I'd driven to my grandfather's house in desperation. I'd broken protocol, risked my career, violated my oath of secrecy because I couldn't watch my family walk blindly into destruction. I'd told him just enough to hopefully save them without revealing classified information. Kozlov Industries, Janet continued reading. Chen Maritime Holdings. Blackstone Financial Group. Rebecca warned me that these companies were dangerous, that they would bring federal scrutiny to anyone associated with them. She told me to get our family out of those partnerships immediately. The names hit the room like physical blows. I watched recognition dawn on my father's face, followed by something that looked like horror. I tried to convince Robert to sever those ties, the will continued. But he was stubborn. The contracts were too lucrative, the relationships too profitable. He said Rebecca was being paranoid, that her government job was making her see conspiracies everywhere. He refused to listen. Jesus Christ, my father whispered. Those were the companies. The ones the FBI said were. He couldn't finish the sentence. Money laundering fronts, I said quietly. All three of them. They were funneling money from Eastern European criminal organizations through American construction contracts. The FBI had been tracking them for 2 years before they got to Williams Construction. Claire stared at me in shock. You knew and you didn't tell us. I tried to tell you without telling you. There's a difference. If I had revealed classified information directly, I would have been arrested for treason. But I could drop hints, make suggestions, and hope that someone would listen. But Dad didn't listen, Marcus said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. Janet continued with the will. Robert ignored Rebecca's warnings, and 6 months later, federal agents raided our business. Everything she had tried to prevent came to pass. But what the rest of you don't know is what happened next. I felt sick. Whatever my grandfather was about to reveal, I had never told him these details. How could he possibly know? After the raid, after the investigation began, Rebecca came to me again. This time she was different. Devastated. She told me she had made a choice that would destroy her relationship with her family forever, but it was the only way to protect us from something much worse. The room was dead silent now. Even the sounds from outside, traffic, birds, the hum of the air conditioning, seemed to have faded away. She told me that Williams Construction was going to be used as the scapegoat for a massive financial crime, that the federal prosecutors were planning to charge Robert with conspiracy, money laundering, and foreign corruption. The evidence was overwhelming, and Robert would have spent the rest of his life in federal prison. My father's face had gone white. That's not, they never said, because Rebecca made sure they didn't have to, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. There was another way. A way to expose the real criminals without destroying an innocent man who had been manipulated into their scheme. Janet turned the page and continued. Rebecca told me she could save her father, but it would require her to do something that would make her family hate her forever. She would have to publicly distance herself from Williams Construction, pretend that she had no prior knowledge of our business dealings, and allow the media to paint her as a cold government agent who chose duty over family loyalty. The pieces were falling into place now, and I could see the understanding in their faces, the horror of what they had believed about me, and the growing realization of what had actually happened. She sacrificed her relationship with all of you to keep Robert out of prison, the will continued. And she did it knowing that none of you would ever know the truth. She did it knowing that you would hate her for the rest of her life. Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. You let us hate you. You let us think you had abandoned us. It was the only way to sell the story, I said. The federal prosecutors needed to believe that I had no personal connection to Williams Construction, that my investigation was purely professional. If they thought I was protecting my family, the whole case would have fallen apart. But the business still collapsed. Claire protested. Dad still lost everything. Dad lost his business, I corrected. But he kept his freedom, and more importantly, he kept his life. Janet read the next section. What Rebecca couldn't tell any of you is that Kozlov Industries wasn't just laundering money. They were financing terrorist operations in Eastern Europe. The money flowing through Williams Construction was eventually used to fund attacks that killed civilians. When Rebecca uncovered this connection, she had a choice: expose everything and watch her father go to prison as an unwitting accomplice to terrorism, or find another way. I remembered that night in the secure facility, staring at satellite photos of a bombed marketplace in Prague, reading intelligence reports that traced the funding back through a chain of shell companies that led directly to our family business. The sick realization that every payment my father had received from Kozlov had blood on it, even though he had no idea what he was truly involved in. The other way was something called a controlled demolition, Janet continued. Rebecca would feed the FBI just enough information to destroy the money laundering network without revealing the terrorism connection. Williams Construction would be portrayed as a victim, a legitimate business that had been deceived by sophisticated criminals. Robert would face financial ruin but not criminal charges. "And you did this without telling us," my father said, his voice hollow. "I couldn't tell you. If you had known what was really happening, you would have acted differently. The FBI was watching everything. Your phone calls, your emails, your behavior. If you had suddenly started acting like you knew you were in danger, they would have figured out that someone had leaked information to you. So you let us think you had betrayed us. I let you think whatever you needed to think to stay safe and stay free." Janet was nearing the end of the section. Rebecca saved more than just her father. The investigation she conducted led to the arrest of 12 international criminals, the seizure of over $2 billion in terrorist funding, and the prevention of at least 6 planned attacks across Europe. She received commendations from 3 different countries and a classified medal from the president himself. But she couldn't tell her family any of this, because the operation was sealed for national security reasons. I had never told my grandfather about the medal ceremony, a closed-door event in the Oval Office, just me and the president, and 2 security officials. No photographers, no press, no family to share the moment with. I had stood in the most powerful room in the world, being honored for saving countless lives, and all I could think about was how much I missed my family. "The last thing Rebecca said to me," Janet read, "was that she would rather have our hatred than our graves. She said losing our love was a price she could live with, but losing our lives was not." The silence stretched on for what felt like eternity. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and irregular in my ears. Finally my father spoke. "Why didn't you tell us later, after it was over?" "Because it was never over," I said. "The classification holds for life. And because," I paused, struggling to find the words. "Because by the time I could have said something, you had already built a life without me. You had already decided who I was and what I had done. I thought maybe it was better to leave it that way." Claire was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "We hated you for 8 years. We blamed you for everything that happened to us. I know. We didn't invite you to Mom's funeral. I know. She died thinking you had abandoned her. I know." The weight of those words hung in the air like a physical presence. 8 years of misunderstanding. 8 years of pain that could have been avoided if I had been able to tell them the truth. But the truth was a luxury I couldn't afford, not when national security was at stake, and not when their lives depended on their genuine ignorance. Janet closed the will and looked around the table. "Theodore wanted you to know all of this, before we proceeded with the distribution of his estate. He said he couldn't let Rebecca continue to carry this burden alone." I looked at my family, really looked at them, for the first time in 8 years. I saw the shock, the confusion, the dawning understanding of what they had lost, and what I had sacrificed. But I also saw something else, the beginning of a recognition that the woman they had hated was not the woman they thought they knew. The revelation hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. I watched my family's faces transform as the weight of what they'd learned settled in. Understanding was one thing, accepting it was another entirely. My father broke the silence first, his voice hoarse. "How long have you been carrying this alone?" 8 years, 2 months, 16 days. The precision surprised even me. But I had counted. Every morning when I woke up to empty phone logs and no family photos on my desk. Every holiday I spend alone in my apartment, watching other people's celebrations through my window. "Rebecca," Claire whispered. But I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Learning the truth didn't automatically erase years of resentment. Why didn't Grandpa tell us sooner? Why wait until now? Janet shuffled through the papers. "He addresses that. There's more. More. Of course there was more. My grandfather had been a thorough man in life, and apparently death hadn't changed that. I waited to tell you this truth," Janet read, "because I hoped Rebecca would find the strength to tell you herself. I hoped that time would soften the edges of what happened, that love would eventually overcome the silence that duty had imposed. But as I write this, lying in a hospital bed with my body failing and my granddaughter still in exile from her own family, I realize that some wounds don't heal on their own. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He was sick for months. None of us thought to— To what? I asked quietly. To call the granddaughter you'd written off? To include the family member you'd decided was dead to you? That's not fair, he protested. Isn't it? The words came out sharper than I intended. I lost Mom's funeral because no one bothered to tell me she was dying. I've missed 8 Christmases, missed Emily's confirmation, missed your promotion ceremony, missed Claire's divorce proceedings. I've been a ghost in my own family for nearly a decade, and you're worried about what's fair. The truth was that isolation had become my normal state. I had learned to navigate holidays by working extra shifts, volunteering at soup kitchens, anything to avoid the silence of my empty apartment during times when families gathered. I had learned to celebrate promotions alone, to face personal crises without a support system, to make major life decisions without anyone to talk them through with. My work colleagues knew me as competent, reliable, dedicated. They didn't know that I ate dinner alone most nights, that I had no emergency contacts in my phone besides my supervisor, that the last birthday card I'd received was from a pharmaceutical company, reminding me about annual checkups. You could have reached out, Claire said, but her voice lacked conviction. To who? To the father who hung up on me when I called about the will reading, to the brother who changed his phone number without telling me, to the sister who blocked me on every social media platform. I paused, letting that sink in. I tried reaching out. For the first 2 years I tried constantly. That was the part they didn't know. The part the will wouldn't cover because my grandfather hadn't witnessed it. The dozens of letters I'd written and never sent. The birthday cards I'd addressed but never mailed. The Christmas presents I'd bought for Emily that still sat in my closet, wrapped and growing more obsolete each year. I had driven to Marcus's house 3 times in the first year after Detroit. Sat in my car across the street, watching him mow his lawn or wash his car, trying to work up the courage to knock on his door. Each time, I'd remembered the federal prosecutor's warnings about maintaining distance, about the ongoing investigations, about the need to keep the narrative clean. Each time, I'd driven away without making contact. I called Dad on his birthday for 3 years straight. I continued. He hung up every time. I sent Christmas cards to Claire's old address. They came back marked return to sender. I tried to visit Mom when she first got sick, but the hospital said family members had requested that I not be allowed in her room. The last part wasn't entirely true. I had never actually made it to the hospital. I had driven there, parked in the visitor lot, and sat in my car for 4 hours, paralyzed by the certainty that my presence would cause more pain than comfort. But they didn't need to know that. They were carrying enough guilt already. My father's hands were shaking slightly. We believed you had chosen your career over us. We thought you didn't care. I cared so much that I destroyed my own life to save yours. The words came out louder than I intended, echoing off the conference room walls. Do you want to know what my life looks like now? What 8 years of protecting you has cost me? I didn't wait for an answer. The words were pouring out now, years of suppressed pain and isolation finding their voice. I live alone in a studio apartment in Arlington. I have no friends because I can't talk about my work, and I have no family to talk about. I haven't been on a date in 3 years because how do you explain to someone that you can't introduce them to your family, because your family thinks you're a traitor? I eat dinner alone every night. I spend holidays working because it's easier than sitting at home wondering what you're all doing without me. Claire was crying again, but I couldn't stop. The dam had burst. I have no one to call when I'm sick. No one to celebrate with when something good happens at work. No one who knows my middle name or remembers my birthday or cares whether I make it home safely at night. I traded a family for a mission, and I've been living with that choice every single day since. The silence that followed was different from before, heavier, more complete. They were finally understanding the full scope of what had happened, not just to them but to me. Janet cleared her throat gently. There's one more section, about the consequences for Rebecca specifically. I closed my eyes. What else could my grandfather possibly know? Rebecca's sacrifice went far beyond her relationship with her family, Janet read. The classification requirements for the Detroit operation meant that she couldn't seek counseling for the trauma she experienced. She couldn't talk to friends about the stress of the investigation. She couldn't even keep a journal because everything related to the case had to remain secure. That much was true. The psychological evaluation reports were sealed. The debriefing sessions were classified. Even my medical records related to the stress-induced insomnia and anxiety I developed during the investigation were locked away in government files. More significantly, her role in the Detroit operation made her a target. The criminal organizations she helped expose put a price on her head. For the first 2 years after the case closed, she lived under federal protection. She had to move 3 times. She couldn't contact her family even if she wanted to because doing so would have put them in danger. That was the piece I'd never been able to explain. Even after the initial classification restrictions were lifted, even when I might have been able to rebuild bridges with my family, the security concerns remained. Kozlov Industries had tentacles that reached far beyond what the public arrests had revealed. There were people in dark corners of the world who knew my name and wanted me dead. Rebecca couldn't tell you that she was protecting you by staying away, the will continued. She couldn't explain that every birthday card she didn't send, every holiday gathering she missed, every funeral she stayed away from was as much about keeping you safe as it was about maintaining operational security. Marcus looked stricken. You were in witness protection, something like that. Federal marshals, safe houses, new identities every few months. It wasn't exactly the glamorous life you all imagined I was living. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had spent 8 years believing I was living some exciting government agent fantasy, jet-setting around the world on classified missions, choosing adventure over family responsibility. The reality was that I had spent 2 years looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows, sleeping with a loaded gun under my pillow. When did it end? My father asked quietly. It didn't really end. It just evolved. I still have security protocols I have to follow. I still can't go to certain places or associate with certain people. I still get threat assessments every 6 months. I paused. I still can't have a normal life. But you could have contacted us eventually, Claire said, once the immediate danger passed. Could I? I met her eyes directly. By the time the security restrictions relaxed enough for me to consider reaching out, you had all moved on. Dad had rebuilt his business. Marcus got promoted to regional manager. Claire got married and divorced. Emily grew up. You created a life without me in it, and I wasn't sure there was room for me anymore. That was the cruelest part of the isolation. Not just that I had been cut off from my family, but that life had continued without me. They had experienced joys and sorrows, milestones and ordinary moments, all without my presence. I had become a stranger to people who shared my DNA, irrelevant to the daily rhythms of lives I had once been central to. There was always room, my father said, but his voice was uncertain. Was there? When was the last time any of you wondered what I was doing for Christmas? When was the last time you saw something that reminded you of me and thought about calling? When was the last time you missed me? The questions hung in the air unanswered, because we all knew the truth. They had stopped missing me years ago. They had filled the Rebecca-shaped hole in their lives with other things, other people, other priorities. They had learned to live without me so completely that my absence had become normal. And I had learned to live without them too. That was the part that scared me most. Somewhere in the past 8 years, I had stopped expecting them to call. I had stopped hoping for reconciliation. Begin to the Beckas called, Vive for reconciliation. I had built a life around their absence, and now I wasn't sure how to make room for their presence again. Janet was watching me carefully, and I realized she was waiting for me to give her permission to continue. There was more to read, more revelations to uncover, but she understood that this was about more than just an inheritance now. This was about whether a family could be rebuilt from the ashes of misunderstanding and years of accumulated pain. I nodded slightly. Whatever else my grandfather had to say, we had come this far. We might as well see it through to the end. Janet turned to the final pages of the will, her movements deliberate and careful. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from hostility to something more complex, a mixture of grief, guilt, and the fragile possibility of understanding. Theodore's final instructions are quite specific, she said, looking around the table. He's arranged what he calls a demonstrations to help you understand not just what Rebecca sacrificed, but what she continues to sacrifice every day. I felt a chill run down my spine. My grandfather had been unpredictable in life, prone to grand gestures that caught everyone off guard. Apparently, death hadn't changed that aspect of his personality. At precisely 3:47 p.m. today, Janet read, a representative from the United States Treasury Department will arrive at this office. This representative has been instructed to provide Rebecca Williams with a choice. The choice I wish I had been able to give her 8 years ago. My blood ran cold. What kind of choice? Janet glanced at her watch. It's 3:43 now. I suppose we'll find out in a few minutes. The timing was impossibly precise, which meant my grandfather had orchestrated this months in advance. He had known exactly when he was going to die, or at least had planned for multiple contingencies. The thought was both impressive and terrifying. I don't understand, Marcus said. What could the Treasury Department possibly want with a will reading? Before I could answer, the conference room door opened. Janet's receptionist appeared, looking flustered. Miss Holloway, there's a man here from the Treasury Department. He says he's expecting. Send him in. The man who entered was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. I recognized him immediately, though we had never been formally introduced. Deputy Secretary Harrison, I said, standing out of reflex. Agent Williams. He nodded respectfully, then looked around the table. I apologize for the intrusion. I'm here at the specific request of Theodore Williams, acting on instructions he provided to the Treasury Department 6 months ago. My family stared in confusion. Deputy secretaries of the Treasury didn't typically make house calls to law offices in Ohio. The fact that one was here meant this was about more than just a family inheritance. Theodore Williams contacted our office last October, Harrison continued, settling into the chair that Janet had quickly provided. He claimed to have information about ongoing threats to national financial security. Specifically, he said his granddaughter had been monitoring a situation that required immediate attention, but that she was constrained from acting due to family circumstances. That's impossible, I said. My grandfather didn't have a security clearance. He couldn't have known about ongoing operations. Harrison smiled slightly. Your grandfather was more resourceful than you gave him credit for. He made some very educated guesses based on conversations he overheard, patterns he observed, and research he conducted independently. His conclusions were remarkably accurate. He opened his briefcase and removed a tablet, which he placed on the table facing me. Agent Williams, for the past 18 months, you've been tracking financial irregularities related to the Meridian Banking Group, is that correct? I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was reeling. Meridian was a classified investigation, known only to a handful of people in the Treasury Department and the FBI. I can't discuss ongoing operations. Of course not, but I can. Harrison touched the tablet screen, bringing up a series of financial charts and data flows. Meridian Banking Group has been facilitating the transfer of approximately $12 billion from state-sponsored cyber attacks into legitimate American investment funds. They're essentially laundering money for foreign governments engaged in digital warfare against the United States. My family listened in stunned silence as Harrison outlined the scope of the investigation. The numbers were staggering, the implications terrifying. Foreign governments had been using sophisticated cyber attacks to steal money from American businesses, then laundering that money through a network of banks that appeared completely legitimate on the surface. Agent Williams has identified the key vulnerabilities in Meridian's system, Harrison continued. She's developed a strategy to not only stop the money laundering, but to trace the funds back to their sources and recover billions of dollars for the victims of these cyber attacks. Then what's the problem? Claire asked. Harrison looked directly at me. The problem is that implementing Agent Williams' strategy requires her to go undercover for approximately 18 months. She would need to assume a false identity, relocate to Hong Kong and embed herself within Meridian's senior management structure. During that time, she would have no contact with family, friends, or anyone from her previous life. The room fell silent. I stared at the tablet, seeing financial projections and operational timelines that represented the next phase of my career, a phase that would require me to disappear completely from whatever remained of my personal life. It's a voluntary assignment, Harrison added. Agent Williams has been eligible for early retirement for 2 years. She could walk away from government service tomorrow if she chose to. My father spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're asking her to disappear again." "We're not asking anything," Harrison corrected. "We're offering her a choice. She can take the Hong Kong assignment and help us recover billions of dollars while preventing future cyber attacks. Or she can retire and pursue a personal life without the constraints of government service." I looked around the table at my family, at Claire, who was crying quietly, at Marcus, whose face showed a mixture of pride and terror, at my father, who looked like he was aging 10 years with each word Harrison spoke. "There's a third option," Harrison said, his voice softer now. "Agent Williams could take a desk position, consulting work analysis, training new agents. She would remain in Washington, maintain a regular schedule, and have the freedom to rebuild her personal relationships." "What's the catch?" I asked, though I already knew. "The desk position pays significantly less, and," he paused, "the Meridian investigation would proceed with a different agent. Someone with less experience, less insight into the financial networks involved. The operation would be more dangerous and less likely to succeed." There it was. The choice my grandfather had somehow known I would face. Professional duty versus personal redemption. The mission that could save billions of dollars and prevent future attacks, or the chance to finally have a family again. "How many people would be affected if the Meridian operation fails?" I asked. Harrison consulted his tablet. "Based on current projections, the cyber attacks they're facilitating will impact approximately 2.3 million American businesses over the next 5 years. The financial losses could exceed $50 billion. Small businesses, retirement funds, college savings accounts, the damage would be widespread and devastating." I thought about the families represented by those numbers, parents who would lose their children's college funds, retirees who would see their pensions evaporate, small business owners who would face bankruptcy through no fault of their own, all because foreign governments had found a way to steal from Americans without consequence. "And if I take the Hong Kong assignment, conservative estimates suggest we could recover 80% of the stolen funds and shut down the entire network permanently. You would save those 2.3 million businesses from financial ruin." My family was watching me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Fear, pride, resignation, hope, all mixed together in proportions I couldn't calculate. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. "The assignment begins in 6 weeks. If you're going to Hong Kong, you'll need to start training and preparation immediately." Harrison closed his tablet. "But Theodore Williams requested that you be given until the end of this meeting to make your decision." "He knew," my father said quietly. "Somehow he knew this was coming." "Your grandfather was a remarkable man," Harrison agreed. "He understood that Agent Williams has been carrying an impossible burden, protecting her country while sacrificing her family, then sacrificing her family again to protect her country. He wanted her to face this choice with her family's full understanding of what was at stake." I looked around the table one more time. These people had been my whole world once. They could be again if I chose the desk job. We could have family dinners, holiday celebrations, birthday parties. I could watch Emily graduate from high school, attend Marcus's kids' soccer games, help Claire through whatever came next in her life. Or I could disappear into another identity, spend 18 months in Hong Kong, and save millions of Americans from financial devastation, while my family went back to their lives without me. The weight of the decision settled on my shoulders like a familiar coat, heavy, uncomfortable, but somehow fitting perfectly. Harrison stood up. "I'll wait outside while you discuss this as a family. Agent Williams, I'll need your answer before I leave." As the door closed behind him, I found myself facing the same impossible choice I'd been making for nearly a decade. Duty or family, mission or love, saving strangers or saving myself. Only this time, my family knew what was really at stake. The silence in the room was absolute. Outside, I could hear the muffled sounds of traffic, distant conversations, the ordinary world continuing while my family and I sat frozen in this moment of impossible decision. My father spoke first, his voice steady but strained. "Rebecca, before you decide anything, there's something I need to say." I looked at him, surprised by the firmness in his tone. For 8 years I've been angry, bitter. I told myself that my daughter had chosen her career over her family, that she had abandoned us when we needed her most. He paused, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I was wrong, not just wrong, I was selfish, Dad. No, let me finish. I spent so much time feeling betrayed that I never stopped to think about what you must have been going through. I never considered that maybe you were protecting us in the only way you could. I was so focused on what I had lost that I never thought about what you had sacrificed. Claire wiped her eyes with a tissue. We all were. We were so hurt, so angry about losing the business, and Mom getting sick and everything falling apart. It was easier to blame you than to accept that sometimes bad things just happen. Marcus leaned forward. The truth is, we needed someone to be angry at, and you weren't there to defend yourself, so you became the villain in our story. We turned you into the reason for everything that went wrong. I felt something shifting inside my chest, a loosening of knots that had been tied tight for 8 years. You had every right to be angry. Your lives were destroyed. Our lives were complicated, my father corrected. Yours was destroyed. We lost a business, some money, our pride. You lost your family. There's no comparison. Janet, who had been sitting quietly through this exchange, cleared her throat gently. There's one more section of the will. Theodore wanted this read after you'd heard from the Treasury Department. She picked up the final pages, her voice softer now. To my family, if you're hearing this final section, it means Rebecca is facing another impossible choice. Another moment where duty and love are pulling her in opposite directions. I want you to understand something that took me far too long to realize. I held my breath, wondering what final revelation my grandfather had prepared. Rebecca has spent her entire adult life protecting people, not just as her job, but as her nature. She protected us from our own ignorance about Kozlov Industries. She protected her father from prison. She protected all of us from the truth when the truth would have hurt us. And now she's being asked to protect millions of Americans she'll never meet. Janet paused, looking around the table. But who protects Rebecca? Who looks out for the person who's always looking out for everyone else? For 8 years, the answer has been no one. I don't want that to continue. My throat tightened. Even from beyond the grave, my grandfather understood me better than I understood myself. So I want each of you to know, whatever Rebecca decides today, I support her completely. If she chooses the mission, you will support her too. If she chooses family, you will make room for her, without guilt or expectation, and if she chooses something in between, you will respect that choice as well. But most importantly, Janet continued reading. I want Rebecca to know that her value as a person is not determined by how many people she saves or how many sacrifices she makes. She has already given enough. She has already done enough. Whatever she chooses now, she chooses as a free woman who owes nothing to anyone except herself. The words hit me like a physical force. For 28 years, I had defined myself by my service, by my ability to protect others, by my willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. I had never considered that I might have the right to choose something else. Claire reached across the table and took my hand. It was the first time anyone in my family had touched me in 8 years. Rebecca, I need you to know something. I'd rather have my sister back than save the whole world. That's not fair, I protested. You can't put that choice on me. I'm not putting the choice on you. I'm telling you that whatever you choose, you're not choosing between family and strangers. You're choosing between different ways of being our sister. If you go to Hong Kong, you'll be our sister who's saving the world. If you stay, you'll be our sister who's building a life with us. Either way, you're still our sister. Marcus nodded. For 8 years, we acted like you had stopped being part of this family. But you never stopped being Rebecca Williams. You never stopped being Dad's daughter, our sister, Emily's aunt. We were the ones who forgot that. I looked at my father, who was crying silently. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. I should have said that 8 years ago, and I should have kept saying it every day since. You saved my life, protected our family, and served your country with honor. I'm proud to be your father. The weight of those words I had waited 8 years to hear, nearly broke me. But there was still a decision to make. The Hong Kong assignment, I said slowly. If I take it, there's no guarantee I'll come back. Deep cover operations. Sometimes people don't survive them. We know, my father said. But we also know that if anyone can do it and come home safely, it's you. And if I don't take it, those 2.3 million businesses, will face whatever they face, Claire interrupted. You're not responsible for every bad thing that happens in the world, Rebecca. You're allowed to choose yourself for once. I closed my eyes, thinking about the choice my grandfather had arranged for me to face. Not just the immediate decision about Hong Kong, but the larger question about what kind of life I wanted to live, who I wanted to be. When I opened my eyes, I knew what I was going to do. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where Deputy Secretary Harrison was waiting by his government sedan, checking his phone. In 6 weeks, I could be on a plane to Hong Kong, assuming a new identity, beginning what might be the most important mission of my career. Or I could be having dinner with my family, starting the slow process of rebuilding relationships that had been broken for nearly a decade. I need to ask you all something, I said, still facing the window. If I take the desk job, if I stay in Washington but remain with the Treasury Department, would you be willing to relocate? All of you? The question surprised them. I could hear chairs shifting, quiet murmurs of confusion. What do you mean? Marcus asked. I turned back to face them. I mean that if we're going to rebuild this family, we need to do it properly, not weekend visits or holiday phone calls. I mean really be a family again. Dad, you could consult for defense contractors in the D.C. area. Marcus, there are construction companies all over Virginia that need experienced managers. Claire, the school systems around Washington are excellent. Emily could finish high school there and be close to some of the best colleges in the country.
You want us to move to be near you?
Claire asked, disbelief evident in her voice. I want us to be near each other. I've spent 8 years living like I don't have a family. I don't want to spend the next 8 years the same way, even if we're talking again. I paused, gathering my thoughts. But I also can't walk away from my work completely. The desk job Harrison mentioned, it would let me train new agents, consult on major cases, and help develop strategies for future operations. I could still serve my country, just differently. My father was quiet for a long moment.
You'd give up the Hong Kong mission?
Risk those millions of businesses. I'd make sure the agent who takes my place is as prepared as possible. I'd provide every piece of intelligence I've gathered, every insight I've developed. It wouldn't be the same as me going, but it wouldn't be starting from scratch either. And you'd want us to uproot our lives to be close to you. I looked at each of them in turn. I'm asking if you'd be willing to invest in rebuilding what we lost. Not just talking about it, not just feeling guilty about the past, but actually doing the work of being a family again. It wouldn't be easy. We're all different people than we were 8 years ago. But if we're serious about this, if we really want to try, Emily's voice surprised everyone. She had been so quiet throughout the meeting that I'd almost forgotten she was there. I'd like that. I'd like to get to know my aunt. The simplicity of her statement cut through all the complexity, all the analysis and hand-wringing. A 15-year-old girl who wanted to know her aunt. It was the most compelling argument anyone could have made. Claire smiled through her tears. I could teach anywhere, and honestly, a fresh start sounds good right now. Marcus nodded slowly. The D area has plenty of construction work, and Sarah has always wanted to live somewhere with more cultural opportunities for the kids. All eyes turned to my father. He sat quietly for what felt like an eternity, then looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen since I was a child. I spent 8 years regretting the daughter I thought I'd lost, he said. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life regretting the chance to get her back. I felt something break open inside my chest, not breaking apart but breaking free. 8 years of isolation, of carrying burdens alone, of defining myself solely through service to strangers. All of it suddenly seemed less important than the possibility of having Sunday dinners with my family again. Then that's my decision, I said. I'll take the desk job, and I'll help the agent going to Hong Kong be as successful as possible. I walked to the door and opened it. Deputy Secretary Harrison looked up from his phone as I approached. Agent Williams, have you made your decision? I have. I'll take the consulting position. But I want to personally train whoever takes the Hong Kong assignment. And I want to remain available for strategic consultation throughout the operation. Harrison nodded. That can be arranged. The agent we have in mind is good, but she'll benefit from your expertise. He paused. Are you sure about this? The Hong Kong mission is exactly the kind of operation you excel at. I'm sure. I've spent enough years excelling at operations. It's time I tried excelling at being a person again. As Harrison drove away, I walked back into the conference room where my family was waiting. Janet was gathering the will documents, but she smiled as I entered. "There's one more thing," she said. "The actual inheritance." Theodore left specific instructions about the distribution of his estate. I had almost forgotten that this had started as a will reading. The money, the property, the material legacy seemed insignificant compared to what we had gained and lost and found again in this room. "The house goes to Rebecca," Janet announced, "along with enough money to make the transition to consulting work financially comfortable. The rest of the estate is to be divided equally among all family members, with one condition." "What condition?" my father asked. "That every Christmas for the next 10 years the entire family gathers at the house. No exceptions, no excuses, no letting work or life or old grudges interfere." Theodore called it insurance against future stupidity. We all laughed, the first genuine laughter that had included me in 8 years. Later, as we walked out of the law office together, Emily fell into step beside me. "Aunt Rebecca, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Were you scared? All those years when you couldn't talk to us?" I considered the question carefully, terrified, every single day. "But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." She nodded, processing this. "I think I understand now why Grandpa was proud of you. It's not just about saving people. It's about doing what's right, even when it costs you everything." Out of the mouths of babes. A 15-year-old had just articulated what it had taken me 3 decades to understand about myself. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my grandfather's house, my house now, preparing dinner for 8 people. My father was in the living room, showing Marcus's kids how to play chess. Claire was helping Emily with college applications at the dining room table. Marcus was fixing a loose cabinet door, grumbling good-naturedly about the house's need for updates. It was loud, chaotic, imperfect. Nothing like the quiet efficiency of my old life. Everything like the family I had forgotten I wanted. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Chen, the woman who had taken the Hong Kong assignment. "Mission successful. Meridian network completely dismantled. Recovered $47 billion. Coming home next week. Thank you for the training." I smiled and put the phone away without responding. There would be time to celebrate her success later. Right now I have more important work to do. "Rebecca," my father called from the living room. "Emily wants to know if you'll help her with her essay about courage. Apparently she's writing about someone she knows." I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked toward the living room, toward the noise and chaos and beautiful imperfection of a family learning to be a family again. For the first time in 8 years, I was exactly where I belonged. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.